As a Christian, my whole life, I thought that this lady named Mary, the mother of Jesus, literally, notice I used the word literally, was impregnated by God. And that was what I believed. I creedal Christian type. Never really put too much thought into it critically. I did think, what are the Roman Catholics doing? Cut the crap. She was a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus, but she had sex with Mary or with Joseph not long after that. And I think Matthew says after that he knew her or something, which is kind of like he was with her. That's what I thought. And then I found out that other men in history had like gods impregnate their moms. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, this is pretty big deal. Like, what's going on here? So Jesus is obviously the only person who was ever like divinely birthed in history, right?
Well, no.
Really?
Yeah. You might be surprised to learn that there are several of those. Now, this isn't parallelomania. This is the reality of the ancient world. This is how, like I've been arguing all along, this is how you install someone in the Hall of Fame. This is how you give them that extra credibility to rule, to be regarded. Lots of times you find this in foundation myths or foundation stories. Kings end up being divinely parented. They're demigods in that way. Was this an ontologically real kind of story? No. This was a custom that went on for generations and centuries, and you could find it in countless individuals. I catalog, I don't know, like 50 or something like that in my book, and I was just getting started. And so, yeah, and so I've got sired by Zeus, a whole bunch of these, Achilles, Athleus, Alexander, Amphion, Argus, Pelasgus, Castor, Corinthus. Corinthus, by the way, is the founder of the city of Corinth, was a demigod sired by Zeus. He had one human parent and one divine. And so I could go on and on and on. The list is any number. It's kind of a who's who, and there's a lot of people that you don't even know. There were just rulers and kings of various places and times throughout the Hellenistic and Roman world that were elevated with this kind of story embellishment. They were, divinely parented. One, the key is that you've got one God that is a parent that is God, and another that is immortal. And so normally that's going to be a male God and a female mortal, but the opposite also happens with some of the female deities. And so.
And so let me paint this another way. You're probably not used to having things thrown at you like this, but I had a conversation, again, I mentioned in one of our videos before with Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy is what he goes by, and other Christians who just, you can tell they have disdain for what I'm saying when I say like, okay, I read Suetonius, Lives of the Caesars on the Divine Augustus, and I love the story, and I will get it out and read it to them. And like be reading the portents leading up to this man's life and his birth and his father, his real father, according to the story, is Apollo. Okay. And like, it's in the shape of a snake and and I'm like, dude, that's a cool story. I'm not going to lie. Like the eagle comes down and steals the food out of his hand and then realizes who he just took the food from, turns back around and comes and returns the food back to him. Yeah. Hey man, I'm sorry, dude. And later on, it's the same thing. An eagle's taking him off to heaven. So I'm throwing this at you just to say, like, is it wrong of me? Do you honestly think it's wrong of me to see that Jesus's birth in that narrative, which we have two different kinds of narratives, by the way, but a narrative of a divine birth, both are doing it, is smack dab in the middle of my walks like a duck, talks like a duck, quacks like a duck thing?
It would have been unmistakable. It's now one of the things that is different is that it's immaculate, so to speak, or the Catholics call it that. It's an asceticized version of it. It's not Zeus's dalliances out, trying to get with women and this sort of thing. And the early Christian criticized some of that, and even the philosophers that had nothing to do with Christianity were criticizing some of those stories on those grounds because of the emerging ascetical philosophies of the time through Platonism and so forth. So that's going on, and Christians are registering within that marketplace of ideas their hero. in their way. But it's not different in kind or in meaning in that way. And so it might be cleaned up, sanitized or whatever in terms of, it's not an X-rated situation. But at the same time, though, it signals the exact same thing. So just
because she didn't have sex in this act, that ultimately makes no difference of what kind of narrative this is.
That is correct. And so, in fact, we can go the predecessor to the Augustus myth. And by the way, Augustus, it's funny because you get this wild little story at the beginning that's kind of like this decorative little gem at the beginning. Very, very literary, very, very mythical, very, very, and you could see, and all of a sudden the modality changes in the text to this mundane figure that's described in very human terms for more or less. It's still exalted in some ways, but
he still makes mistakes though.
You could see Augustus was a real guy, we're not, but I don't think anyone's losing sleep over the idea that maybe he was divinely parented. I don't think there's anybody taking that seriously, and for good reason. We're rational people, or at least we're supposed to be. That rationality goes out the window as soon as we get to Christianity. For whatever reason, these are sacred stories and there's a whole history behind that, as we all know. But we need to be honest with ourselves. And so Augustus had as his predecessor Alexander the Great. So if you go back to the divine birth myth of Alexander, that was the greatest name of that time, of a historical figure. You couldn't get any more exalted than Alexander. The Caesars all were competing with his legacy. His shadow over the Hellenistic East covered the entirety of it. And so that looming figure was always in the minds of people, especially anywhere you had the idea of ruling, conquering, being a successful leader, this kind of thing. And so everyone was, fashioning, you were measured against Alexander, and imitating Alexander was the way to power in that world. And so Augustus knew that, and that divine birth myth echoes some of the motifs that you get with Alexander's divine birth myth. Now, what I do in the book, I have an excursus where I go and say, not only is Matthew's text like that, but it mimetically is meant to follow that narrative. And so I take it a step further and say, it's deliberate. You've got the most famous guy and this guy that's not even known. And that's one of the things we need to get back to also, is that Jesus was a nobody in that world. There were a lot of big people and big personalities, but when Christianity came on the scene, he was unknown. There was nothing there. And we project back onto his equal significance with everyone else. But that was not at all established at that point. And so he's competing, and he's the stories, the narratives that people are producing are in competition and trying to leverage some of those larger cultural capital forms that were already in the marketplace at that time. And so to mimetically follow Alexander, there's not much more you can do to be more Hellenistic than that. Once you get to Matthew's divine birth myth, though, and that's a comparative study that I have in the book that I offer as almost like a bonus, I guess. Studying all in its own right, really. You really get to the bottom of what's going on there. You also have a virgin birth with Alexander. It's told a little differently, but I follow a variety of mimetic signals. And if you like, I could read it to you.
Sure.
Yeah. Let me read a section here. So this is from Plutarch. He's writing about Alexander's life here, and he's a Greek writer, of Middle Platonist, so to speak. Let me read a little bit of it. So that Alexander, with regard to his lineage, on his father's side, was a descendant of Heracles through Caranus, and on his mother's side was a descendant of Icus through Neoptolemus, is among those things entirely trusted. It is said that Philip, after being initiated into the mysteries of Samothrace, together with Olympias, and while he was but a youth and an orphan, fell in love with her and so betrothed her. Having persuaded her mother Arambus, then the night before they were to consummate the marriage, the bride thought, while there was lightning, that thunderbolt had fallen upon her womb. Okay? Mm-hmm. No one's having sex. that it had fallen upon her womb. From the blow, a fire was ignited. Thereby, as it broke into flames, the fire scattered in all directions. Later, after the wedding, Philip saw himself in a dream placing a signet, a stamp, like a ring, impression on his wife's womb. Hadn't been opened. The emblem of the signet, as it seemed, had an image of a lion. In other words, she's still a virgin.